Good evening, good evening. It's Way here, or if you're sitting in Soho, it's Grandy. I should have one. I should really have one name. It'd make things a bit easier. Anyway, I've got a book for you. Um, it's a book that I thought you'd had read to you already, but it seems that you haven't. So I'm going to do it tonight. It's um, it's a Mr. Man. We're getting through these Mr. Men books. I've got quite a few, you know. I've got a little collection of them, so we might be having them for a little while before we get onto the Greek myths. There we go. Mr. Tall. I wonder why he's called Mr. Tall. I can't think why he'd be called Mr. Tall. Why isn't he called Mr. Blue or Mr. Red Boots or Mr. Big Smiley Face? He's called Mr. Tall. Doesn't make any sense, that. Anyway, we'll have a look at the book. Where are we? Let's get things sorted out. Here we are. That's Mr. Tall. I'm going to make my picture a little bit bigger because Saoirse thinks that Grandad's picture's too small. How's that? Can you see me a little bit better? You need to see the store of pictures, don't you? Let's make it a bit smaller. Oh, put it over here. That might work better. What do you think about that? That's good. Okay, so Mr. Tall was very, oh, I sound like Julia. That's her favourite trick at the moment. Mr. Tall was very, very tall. Quite the tallest person you've ever met. In fact, quite the tallest person you've never met, because you've never met anybody with legs as long as Mr. Tall's legs, have you? Daddy's got quite long legs, hasn't he? Not as long as Mr. Tall. Oh, now the problem with being as tall as Mr. Tall meant that life was just one long problem, as you can see. What's the problem there? He's too long for his bed, isn't he? He's got his feet right at the end, and he's got to have his knees bent, and he's made like a big tent in the middle of his bed. Oh, dear. Oh dear, he used to sigh. Oh dear me, I do so wish that my legs weren't quite so very long. He decided to go for a walk to think over his problem. He was just stepping over a tree when he heard a little voice. Hello! Oh, must be a long way down. Ah, who's that? It was Mr. Small standing underneath a daisy. But Mr. Tall was so tall he couldn't see him. So Mr. Small shouted at the top of his voice, "Hello!" Mr. Small's shout is about as loud as a bee's sneeze. Do you think bees can sneeze? Do you think bees have knees? They must do. Anyway, it took quite some time for Mr. Tall to spot Mr. Small. "Oh," he said gloomily, "it's you." "You don't look very happy," said Mr. Small. "What's up?" "I am," replied Mr. Tall, "because of these silly long legs of mine." "Oh," said Mr. Small. Mr. Small decided to cheer him up. "Let's go for a walk together," he suggested. So they did, which of course didn't work. It was like a giraffe going for a walk with a mouse. Then Mr. Small had an idea, which did work. Aha, look, he's having a giraffe Gigi. And because of the length of Mr. Tall's legs, they very quickly walked all the way to the seaside. Yay! Come for a swim, cried Mr. Small. I can't, replied Mr. Tall. By the time it gets deep enough for me to swim, I'll be out the other side. Think he could walk all the way across the sea? I don't think so. So, Mr. Small went for a swim. Can you see him? There he is there in the water. He's left his hat on the beach. While Mr. Tall sat down, with a face which was nearly as long as his legs. He's very gloomy. Mr. Tickle came along. Hello, he said. You look as if you need cheering up. Care for a tickle? Tickle, tickle, tickle. No thanks, replied Mr. Tall. What I would care for are some different legs. Mine are much too long. So are my arms, said Mr. Tickle cheerfully, but all the better for tickling. Tickle, 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 tickle. And off he went, chuckling, looking for somebody else to tickle. Looking for anybody to tickle. He's always happy, isn't he, Mr. Tickle? Oh, next, Mr. Nosy came along. Cheer up, he said. You look very down in the mouth. What's the problem? It's my legs, said Mr. Tall. They're much too long. Oh, so's my nose, replied Mr. Nosy, laughing, but all the better for poking it into other people's business. And off he went, looking for something to be nosy about, looking for anything to be nosy about. Next, Mr. Greedy came along. Oh, we're seeing all the Mr. Men, aren't we, today? Hello, said Mr. Greedy. You look very gloomy. What's wrong? It's my legs, explained Mr. Tall. They're too big. Oh, so is my tummy, replied Mr. Greedy, but all the better for filling with food. And off he went, licking his lips, looking for a cafe, no doubt. Mr. Tall sat there for a while and thought about Mr. Tickle's arms, Mr. Nosy's nose, and Mr. Greedy's tummy. He smiled, and then he grinned, and then he laughed out loud. Ha, 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 ha. He looked at those legs, those very, very, very long legs of his. All the better for walking, he chuckled. And he walked home. In 4 minutes. 40 miles. Good Lord, that's fast. Mr. Small came out to the sea after his short swim. Oh, and how am I going to get home? He asked himself. So he set off walking all the way home. 40 miles. That was last year. He got home yesterday. Ah, poor Mr. Small. Mr. Tall shouldn't have left him, should he? Should have gone back and given him a lift home. I don't know. No consideration. That's a bit mean. Ah, and here's our list of Mr. Men. Do you know what I've done? I've put a smiley face on every Mr. Man book that think we've read. There. That's Mr. Tall. So every time we read a Mr. Man book, we'll have to put a smiley face. Have to find which Mr. Man it is. We'll have to put a smiley face on him, so we know we've read it. We don't do it twice, then, do we? That would be that. Do you think that's a good plan? I do. Okay. Well, I am going to get my dinner now, and I'll wish you good night. I will see you very, 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 very soon. And I love you all very, 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 very much. That's it. Night, night. Everybody off to sleep. Be good. No waking up. School tomorrow. Yes, it's a school day tomorrow. Night, night. Grandy loves you. See you soon. Ciao. Ciao.